It all started on what seemed like an ordinary Thursday evening. I had just finished a grueling 12-hour shift at the tech startup where I work as a software developer, and all I wanted was to park my car and collapse into bed. But as I turned onto Maple Ridge Lane, something made my blood run cold. There it was, a flashy red BMW parked in my driveway, blocking my garage completely. My driveway. Little did I know this would be the beginning of a 3-month nightmare that would end with not one, but 2 towing incidents and turn our quiet suburban neighborhood into a battleground. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I live in one of those newer developments in Riverside Heights where the houses are packed a bit too close together and parking is about as rare as a peaceful HOA meeting. My house, number 2187, sits at the corner where our street meets Oak Valley Drive. It's a modest 2-story with a driveway that, while not massive, is mine. I bought this place 2 years ago, fresh out of a divorce, and it represented my fresh start. That driveway wasn't just a strip of concrete, it was part of my hard-earned piece of the American dream. Now, I'm generally a pretty laid-back person. Years of debugging code has taught me patience. When something goes wrong, you take a deep breath, analyze the situation, and look for the most logical solution. So instead of immediately calling a tow truck, which, trust me, I would eventually do twice, I decided to handle this like a reasonable adult. I parked my Tesla Model 3 on the street, thankfully finding a spot just 2 houses down, which in our neighborhood is like winning a small lottery, and walked up to the BMW. It was a newer model, perfectly washed and waxed, with a small real estate queen decal on the back window. Great, I thought, someone who should definitely know better about property boundaries. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across my front yard, and my neighbor Tim was out walking his golden retriever, Max. He gave me a curious look as I pulled out my notepad. Yes, I still carry one of those. Old habits from coding meetings die hard, and started writing what I hoped was a polite but firm note. Dear BMW owner, I wrote, trying to keep my handwriting legible despite my growing frustration. I understand parking can be challenging in our neighborhood, but this is a private driveway. Please don't park here in the future. Thanks for understanding. I even added a smiley face, because why not start with kindness? I tucked the note under the windshield wiper, took a quick photo of the car and its license plate, because working in tech has taught me to always document everything, and headed inside. My cat, Binary, greeted me at the door with her usual mix of affection and judgment. As I heated up some leftover pad thai and settled onto my couch, I figured that would be the end of it. Just a one-time mistake by someone who probably didn't realize they were parking in a private driveway. Oh, how wrong I was. What I didn't know then was that this BMW belonged to Ms. Rebecca Sterling, self-proclaimed real estate queen of Riverside Heights, and apparently the most entitled person I would ever have the misfortune of meeting. This wasn't just going to be a simple parking dispute. It was about to become a 3-month saga of escalating pettiness, neighborhood drama, and ultimately sweet justice served cold with a side of tow truck. But at that moment, as I sat there with Binary purring on my lap and my pad thai growing cold, I was still blissfully unaware of the chaos that was about to unfold. I just hoped the BMW would be gone by morning so I could park in my own driveway again. Spoiler alert, it wouldn't be. In fact, this was just the beginning of what my neighbors would later dub the Great Driveway War of Riverside Heights. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual, my mind still dwelling on the BMW situation. As I sipped my first cup of coffee, a necessity for any coding sprint, I peered through my home office window, hoping to see an empty driveway. Instead, I nearly choked on my dark roast. Not only was the BMW still there, but my polite note had been crumpled up and tossed onto my freshly mowed lawn. Now, in my line of work, we have this concept called graceful degradation. When something goes wrong, you try to handle it elegantly before everything crashes. So, I decided to maintain my composure and approach this systematically, like debugging a particularly stubborn piece of code. I grabbed my phone and opened our neighborhood's community app next door. Maybe someone knew who owned the flashy BMW with the real estate queen decal. It took all of 30 seconds to find Rebecca Sterling's profile. Her banner photo was her posing next to that very same car. Her profile described her as Riverside Heights #1 realtor and community influence expert. The irony of a real estate agent disrespecting property boundaries wasn't lost on me. As I scrolled through her profile, yes, I did some reconnaissance. It's called research in the tech world. I noticed she had recently posted about hosting an open house today. The address? 2192 Oak Valley Drive, literally around the corner from my place. Suddenly, her choice of parking spot made a twisted kind of sense. She was using my driveway as her personal parking space for her open house preparations. I decided to try one more diplomatic approach before escalating the situation. After all, in software development, we always do multiple tests before declaring something a critical bug. I wrote a more detailed note, this time using my printer to make it look more official. Dear Ms. Sterling, I noticed you're hosting an open house nearby. While I understand the need for convenient parking, this is a private driveway that I need access to for my own vehicle and garage. There's 2-hour street parking available on Oak Valley Drive, or you might consider parking at the community center just 3 blocks away. Thank you for your understanding. Alex Chen, 2187 Maple Ridge Lane. I even added my phone number, showing I was open to reasonable communication. As I was taping the note to her windshield, using removable painter's tape, I'm passive-aggressive, not a monster. My neighbor Tim came out with Max for their morning walk. Still there, huh? He called out, shaking his head. You know, she did the same thing to the Patels last month during another open house. They were too nice to say anything. That caught my attention. The Patels? At 2175? Yep. Tim nodded while Max wagged his tail enthusiastically. Parked right in their driveway for a whole weekend showing. They had to park 2 streets over. Barbara from the HOA board told me they filed a complaint, but nothing came of it. This was valuable intel. Like any good developer, I believe in learning from others' experiences to avoid repeating the same mistakes. I made a mental note to document this pattern of behavior. You never know when you'll need to demonstrate a bug is actually a feature. I spent the next few hours working from home, periodically glancing out my window while debugging a particularly nasty piece of legacy code. Around noon, I heard the distinctive sound of high heels on concrete. Peering through my blinds, I had strategically positioned my standing desk for optimal driveway surveillance. I watched as Rebecca Sterling click-clacked her way to her BMW. She was exactly what you'd expect from someone who calls themselves the real estate queen. Designer everything, perfectly coiffed blonde hair, and an air of superiority that could probably be detected from space. She read my note, rolled her eyes so dramatically I could see it from my window, and then did something that made me question if I was hallucinating from too much caffeine. She took out a pen, wrote something on the back of my note, and slapped it against my front door. Then she strutted back to her car, backed out of my driveway, and zoomed off toward Oak Valley Drive, leaving a cloud of entitlement in her wake. I waited until she was gone before retrieving my note. On the back, in aggressive pink ink, she had written, "Parking is first come, first served. Your driveway is empty all day anyway. Learn to share. Real estate queen." The audacity of that smiley face made my eye twitch. As a software developer, I deal with bugs all day long, but this was a whole new kind of bug in the system, one that no amount of coding could fix. I carefully folded the note and put it in my desk drawer. Something told me I might need to document this interaction later. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of Rebecca Sterling's reign of real estate terror, and my driveway was about to become her favorite parking spot for a lot more than just open houses. For the next few days, my driveway remained blessedly empty. I'd almost convinced myself that the BMW incident was behind me. Just another quirky story to share during our weekly team stand-ups. But as any developer knows, the moment you think you've fixed a bug is usually when it comes back with a vengeance. Friday afternoon, I was deep in a virtual meeting with our UI/UX team when Binary, my cat, started pawing at my office window, her usual signal that something interesting was happening outside. I glanced over, and there it was, the red BMW, backing into my driveway as if it belonged there. This time Rebecca wasn't alone. She had a younger woman with her, probably another real estate agent, given the matching Sterling Properties blazer. I quickly messaged my team. Emergency situation, taking 15, back soon. In the tech world, we understand emergencies. Usually they involve crashed servers or broken code. This was a different kind of system failure. By the time I got outside, Rebecca and her protégé were already halfway down the street, chattering away about property values and market dynamics. I called out, "Excuse me, Miss Sterling?" She turned, flashing what I can only describe as a shark's idea of a friendly smile. "Oh, hello. You must be Adrian? Alan?" "Alex," I corrected, trying to keep my voice level. "We've sort of met through notes. You're parked in my driveway again." "Oh, that," she waved her hand dismissively. "We're just showing the Peterson place, 3 doors down. It'll only be an hour or two. You don't need your driveway right now anyway, right?" I took a deep breath, channeling my inner project manager dealing with impossible deadlines. "Actually, I do. I work from home and I need to be able to access my garage. There's plenty of street parking available. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us." Now, back to the story. Her younger companion looked uncomfortable, but Rebecca just laughed. "Street parking? In those designer shoes? Honey, do you know what street parking does to Christian Louboutins?" She gestured to her red-soled heels as if they were precious artifacts. "I understand fashion concerns," I said, though my own footwear of choice was usually whatever sneakers were on sale at DSW, but this is private property. You can't just... "Listen," she cut me off, her tone shifting from fake friendly to condescending. "I've been selling houses in Riverside Heights since before you could afford to rent here. I know every HOA board member, every property owner, and every bylaw. Your driveway might be private, but we're all part of a community. Sometimes we need to share." Her protégé was now studying her shoes intently, clearly wishing she were anywhere else. I could relate. "Community is great," I agreed, "but community also means respecting boundaries. Please move your car." Rebecca's smile turned brittle. "We're already running late for our showing. I'll move it in an hour, 2 tops." And with that, she turned and click-clacked away, her protégé scurrying after her. I stood there for a moment, processing what had just happened. In software development, we have this concept called technical debt, when you take shortcuts that will cause problems later. Rebecca Sterling was clearly creating some serious technical debt in our neighborhood dynamics. Back at my desk, I could barely focus on my meeting. The UI team was discussing button placement optimizations, but my mind was on a different kind of user interface problem. I opened my browser and started researching local parking regulations and towing companies. I wasn't ready to go nuclear yet, but like any good developer, I believed in being prepared. As promised, Rebecca returned about 2 hours later. This time, I watched from my security camera feed, a recent installation that would prove very useful in the coming weeks. She was on her phone, gesturing animatedly as she got into her car. Absolutely gorgeous property, Sarah. The Petersons will have multiple offers by Monday. I'm thinking we start at 50 over asking. Her voice faded as she drove away, but she left something behind, a Sterling Properties business card, tucked under my door with a handwritten note. Thanks for the parking spot. You're such a dear, RS, that heart. That perfectly drawn little heart somehow made it worse than any angry response would have been. It was patronizing, dismissive, and infuriating all at once. I added the card to my growing collection of evidence in my desk drawer, right next to the previous notes. As a developer, I'm used to documenting everything. You never know when you'll need to prove exactly what went wrong and when. That evening, as I sat on my porch with my laptop, working on a side project while Binary explored the front yard, Tim walked by with Max. Saw the BMW was back, he mentioned casually. Yeah, I sighed. Getting to be a habit. You know, he said, leaning on my fence, Barbara from the HOA board lives right across from the community center. Plenty of parking. There, like you suggested in your note. I looked up from my laptop. Really? How interesting. Very interesting, Tim agreed, a knowing look in his eye, especially since Barbara's been trying to crack down on parking violations lately. Something about property values and community standards. I nodded slowly, filing this information away. In programming, sometimes the solution to a problem comes from an unexpected source. Maybe it was time to start exploring some alternative debugging strategies. The weekend passed without any BMW sightings, but I knew better than to assume the bug was fixed. In software development, we have a saying, it's not a bug until it's reproducible. Well, Rebecca Sterling was about to prove just how reproducible this problem could be. Tuesday morning, I had a crucial video call with our biggest client scheduled for 10 a.m. At 9:45, I was doing my usual pre-meeting routine, checking my background, making sure my mic worked, and bribing Binary with treats to stay quiet, when I heard the now familiar sound of expensive tires on my driveway. I checked my security camera feed. There she was, the real estate queen herself, not just parking in my driveway, but actively directing 3 other cars to park behind her, effectively turning my property into her personal parking lot. They were all carrying Sterling Properties signs and balloons. Apparently, my driveway had been promoted to official real estate event venue without my knowledge. This was the coding equivalent of someone not just introducing a bug into your system, but actively deploying it to production. I couldn't ignore this. Client meeting or not, this needed to be addressed now. I quickly messaged my team lead. Critical situation. Need 30 minutes? Can someone cover the client call? Thankfully, in tech, we always have backup plans. My colleague Dave stepped in and I headed outside. The scene in my driveway looked like a real estate convention had exploded. Rebecca was holding court in the center of a small group, gesturing dramatically with a Starbucks cup in one hand and her phone in the other. The market in Riverside Heights is absolutely booming, she was saying. Last week I closed a deal at 20% over asking. Excuse me, I interrupted, using my best speaking to difficult stakeholders voice. What exactly is happening? Here, Rebecca turned, that same shark smile spreading across her face. Alex, perfect timing. We're having a real estate agent's walkthrough of the neighborhood, showing off all the hot properties in the area. Your driveway has such perfect positioning for our meeting point. I looked at the other agents, then back at Rebecca. Did it occur to you to ask permission before setting up a business meeting on my private property? Oh, don't be so formal, she laughed, waving her Starbucks cup. We're all professionals here. I brought you a coffee, caramel macchiato. Everyone likes caramel macchiatos, right? She gestured to a cup sitting on my front step like it was a peace offering. One of the other agents, a man in a suit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment, cleared his throat. Rebecca, you did say you had permission to use this location. Of course I do, she trilled. Alex and I have an understanding. Don't we, Alex? In programming, we call this a race condition, when multiple processes try to access the same resource and create chaos. Well, it was time to debug this particular race condition. No, we don't, I said firmly. I've left notes asking you not to park here. I've spoken to you directly about this, and now you're not only parking here but holding business meetings. This needs to stop. All of you need to move your cars, now. Rebecca's smile flickered, but didn't quite fade. Alex, darling, you're making a scene. We'll only be here for an hour. Why don't you take the coffee, go back to whatever little work-from-home job you have, and let the professionals handle their business? That was it. The blue screen of death moment. The terminal crash. The final commit before everything breaks. First, I said, keeping my voice steady, I don't want your coffee. Second, my little work-from-home job is senior software developer at Tech Core Systems. You know, the company that probably powers the apps you use to sell houses. And third, you have exactly 5 minutes to move these cars before I start making calls. Are you threatening me? Rebecca's voice took on a dangerous edge. No, I'm establishing clear boundaries and consequences. In tech, we call that documentation. I pulled out my phone. 4 minutes now. The other agents started shifting uncomfortably. One of them muttered something about another appointment and headed for his car. Another quickly followed. Rebecca watched them go, her perfectly manicured hands tightening around her coffee cup. You're making a big mistake, she said, her voice low. I have connections in this neighborhood. I can make things very difficult for you. I held up my phone, showing the screen's timer. 3 minutes. And by the way, I'm recording this conversation. In tech, we believe in backing up our data. She stared at me for a long moment, then turned on her heel and stormed to her BMW. As she backed out, she rolled down her window. This isn't over. You have no idea who you're dealing with. Actually, I called after her, I document everything. I know exactly who I'm dealing with. As the last car pulled away, I picked up the untouched caramel macchiato from my step and dropped it in the recycling bin. Binary watched from the window, probably judging everyone involved. I checked my watch. Still had 5 minutes before the client call. Walking back inside, I couldn't shake the feeling that Rebecca Sterling had just initiated some sort of neighborhood warfare. In programming terms, she'd just pushed a hostile update to production, and I had a feeling the rollback was going to be messy. The aftermath of the driveway showdown brought an unexpected 2 days of peace. Like any experienced developer, though, I knew this was less a resolution and more like that quiet moment when your code is compiling and you're just waiting to see what breaks next. I used the time productively, installing additional security, cameras, and setting up automated alerts whenever motion was detected in my driveway. I even created a simple script to log timestamps of every entrance and exit. If Rebecca Sterling wanted to play hardball, she was going to learn that a software developer's dedication to documentation was not to be underestimated. Thursday afternoon, I was deep in code review when Binary started doing her alert dance by the window. I checked my security feed and felt my blood pressure spike. The red BMW was back, but this time it was different. Rebecca wasn't just parking. She was hosting what appeared to be a full-blown outdoor meeting with clients, complete with a portable table she'd set up in my driveway. I watched through my security feed as she spread out papers on the table, gesturing enthusiastically to a couple who looked like they'd stepped out of a retirement community brochure. This neighborhood is absolutely perfect for active seniors, she was saying, her voice crystal clear through my new high-definition outdoor microphone. And this particular spot has such wonderful energy. That was it. I'd seen enough. In programming, we have this concept called failing fast. When you know something's going to break, it's better to address it immediately, rather than letting the problems compound. Time to fail fast. I walked outside, laptop in hand, making sure my security cameras were recording everything. "Miss Sterling," I called out, using my most professional voice. "This is private property. You need to pack up and leave. Now." Rebecca turned, treating me to her signature fake smile. "Alex, perfect timing. Mr. and Mrs. Davidson, this is one of our lovely neighbors." "He's so generous with his driveway space, aren't you, Alex?" The elderly couple smiled uncertainly. I didn't smile back. "Ms. Sterling is lying to you," I said directly to them. "I've never given her permission to use my driveway. In fact, I've repeatedly asked her to stop trespassing on my property." Rebecca's smile faltered for a millisecond before returning at full wattage. "Oh, Alex is such a kidder. We have an arrangement, don't we? Remember the coffee I brought you?" "The coffee I threw away? After you staged an unauthorized real estate meeting in my driveway 2 days ago?" I opened my laptop. "Would you like to see the security footage of that incident? I have it all documented, including your threat about making things difficult." "For me," Mr. Davidson frowned. "Rebecca, you said this was your property, that you were showing us." "A simple misunderstanding," Rebecca trilled, but I could see panic starting to creep into her eyes. "I meant the property I'm showing is nearby." "No," I interrupted. "You specifically told them this spot has wonderful energy. I heard everything." "My security system records audio, too." I turned back to the Davidsons. "I'm sorry you've been misled. There's a lovely community center 3 blocks away with ample parking and meeting space. I suggest you continue your discussion there." Mrs. Davidson was already gathering her papers. "I think we've seen enough, Harold," she said quietly. "Thank you for your time, Miss Sterling." As the Davidsons walked to their car, Rebecca's facade finally cracked. Her smile disappeared, replaced by a look of pure venom. "You just cost me a sale," she hissed. "No," I corrected her. "Your dishonesty and trespassing cost you a sale. In tech, we call this a self-inflicted bug." She started angrily packing up her portable table. "You think you're so clever with your cameras and your tech talk. This is real estate, the real world. You have no idea how things work here." "Actually, I do," I replied, still recording everything. "Things work according to laws and property rights, something a real estate agent should understand better than anyone." She shoved the table into her BMW's trunk with enough force to make the whole car shake. "You're making an enemy you can't afford to have. I know people in this neighborhood, important people. And I have video evidence of every interaction we've had," I countered, "including this one. Would you like me to email you the footage? I'm happy to copy the real estate licensing board as well." For a moment, I thought she might explode. Her face turned as red as her BMW, and she gripped her car keys so tightly I could see her knuckles turn white. Then, abruptly, she smiled. Not her fake professional smile, but something far more unsettling. "You know what? Keep your precious driveway. There are plenty of other spots in this neighborhood, and plenty of ways to handle people who don't understand how things work around here." She got into her car, still wearing that disturbing smile. "See you around, neighbor." As she drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just initiated some sort of mutually assured destruction protocol. In programming, we call it a critical system failure. In the real world, I had a feeling I was about to find out exactly what Rebecca Sterling meant by plenty of other ways. Binary watched from the window as I collected the security footage and added it to my growing documentation folder. My cat had surprisingly good instincts about people, and judging by her tail puffing up every time Rebecca appeared, we were in for a bumpy ride. The next week was surprisingly quiet. Too quiet. Anyone who's ever deployed code knows that when things seem too peaceful, it usually means something's brewing beneath the surface. I kept expecting to see the red BMW appear in my security feeds, but day after day, nothing happened. I used the calm to upgrade my home security system further. As a developer, I believe in continuous improvement, so I added motion-triggered lights and even set up a bot to send notifications to my phone whenever certain license plates were detected in the vicinity. Maybe it was overkill, but in my experience, there's no such thing as too much monitoring when you're dealing with a persistent bug in the system. My neighbor Tim stopped by one evening while I was setting up the new lights. "Haven't seen the real estate queen lately?" he remarked as Max investigated my garden beds with his usual enthusiasm. "She's been suspiciously absent," I agreed, adjusting the sensor angle. "But something tells me she's not done yet." Tim nodded, watching Binary observe us regally from her window perch. "Barbara from the HOA mentioned she's been showing houses on the other side of the neighborhood. Apparently she's been telling people some interesting stories about you." I paused my calibration. "What kind of stories?" "Oh, you know," Tim shrugged, but his expression was concerned. "That you're hostile to community growth, that you're decreasing property values with all your surveillance equipment, that sort of thing. Barbara thinks it's hilarious, by the way, says your security setup is exactly what the neighborhood needs." I made a mental note to send Barbara a thank you email. In programming, it's crucial to maintain good relationships with your system administrators, and in this case, the HOA board was definitely system admin level. Just then, my phone buzzed. A notification from my security system. A red BMW had just turned onto Oak Valley Drive. I pulled up the live feed, and sure enough, there was Rebecca driving slowly past my house. She didn't stop, but the way she slowed down and stared at my property gave me the same feeling I get when I spot a potential security breach in my code. "Well, speak of the devil," Tim muttered, watching the BMW cruise by. "Want me to stick around for a bit?" I shook my head. "Thanks, but I've got this covered. Everything's logged and recorded." After Tim left, I reviewed the footage of Rebecca's drive-by. Something about her expression bothered me. It wasn't her usual angry glare or fake smile. She looked almost satisfied, like a QA tester who'd just found a critical vulnerability. That night, I had trouble sleeping. Binary was restless too, pacing between windows like she was running her own security patrol. Around midnight, my phone buzzed again, motion detected in the driveway. I checked the feed, but there was nothing there. False positive? Maybe, but my instincts said otherwise. The next morning, I understood why. While Rebecca hadn't parked in my driveway, she'd done something potentially worse. Every house on my street had received a glossy Sterling Properties flyer in their mailbox. Normal real estate marketing, except these flyers had a special message. Concerned about neighborhood safety, worried about suspicious surveillance, contact your HOA board about properties being used for unauthorized security monitoring. Together, we can maintain our community's privacy and property values. The flyer had a photo of a house that looked suspiciously like mine, though carefully angled to avoid any direct identification. Classic social engineering attack, trying to turn the neighborhood against me without making any direct accusations. I had to admire the strategy, even as it infuriated me. In programming, we call this a side-channel attack, trying to exploit the system through indirect means when direct attacks fail. But Rebecca had made a crucial mistake. She'd left evidence, written evidence, of her attempt to harass me. I carefully collected a flyer and added it to my documentation folder. Then I did what any good developer would do. I started writing a detailed incident report. I emailed Barbara from the HOA board, attaching photos of the flyer along with a timeline of all my interactions with Rebecca Sterling. I kept the tone professional and fact-based, just like I would when reporting a security vulnerability. While I understand Ms. Sterling's right to distribute marketing materials, I'm concerned about the pattern of targeted harassment following her unauthorized use of my property. I've attached relevant documentation, including security footage and photographs. I believe this matter deserves the board's attention, as it affects not just my property, but the professional conduct standards in our community. Barbara's response came within an hour. "Already on it, dear. Funny thing about those flyers. Distributing unauthorized marketing materials in mailboxes is actually a federal offense. I'll be bringing that up at next week's board meeting. Keep documenting everything. I felt a small surge of satisfaction. In technical terms, Rebecca had just deployed code with a critical security flaw, and the system administrators were taking notice. But as I watched her BMW drive past my house again that afternoon, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of a much larger deployment cycle. Binary watched from her window perch, tail twitching. She'd been right about Rebecca from the start. Sometimes the best system monitors are the ones that run on instinct rather than code. The HOA board meeting was scheduled for Thursday evening, but Rebecca Sterling had no intention of waiting that long to make her next move. Wednesday morning, I was in the middle of a crucial code deployment when my phone started buzzing incessantly. Not just one security alert, but a cascade of them, like a denial of service attack on my attention. I pulled up my security feeds to find not just the familiar red BMW in my driveway, but an entire caravan of vehicles. Rebecca had arranged what appeared to be a neighborhood property values workshop right in front of my house. She'd set up not one, but 3 portable tables, complete with a banner that read, "Protecting our community's future." The real kicker. She'd positioned everything so that my security cameras were prominently visible in the background of her presentation setup. About 15 people were gathered around, all clutching Sterling Properties folders and looking concerned as Rebecca gestured dramatically toward my house. I grabbed my phone and laptop and headed outside, but before I could say anything, Rebecca's voice rang out, "And here's the homeowner now." Perfect timing. We were just discussing the impact of excessive surveillance on property values and community trust. The crowd turned to look at me. I recognized a few faces, mostly people from the newer developments on the other side of Riverside Heights. Rebecca had strategically imported an audience who didn't know the full story. "As you can see," Rebecca continued, her voice dripping with fake concern, "this level of monitoring creates an atmosphere of distrust. Studies show that visible security equipment can decrease property values by up to 15%. I had to admire her commitment to the bit. It was like watching someone deliberately introduce bugs into a system and then blaming the antivirus software for performance issues. "Interesting workshop," I said, opening my laptop. "Did you get a permit for this gathering? And more importantly, did you get permission to use my private property as your venue?" Again, Rebecca's smile didn't waver. "This is a community education event. We're on the street, which is public property. Actually," I countered, pulling up my property survey on my laptop, "my property line extends to here." I pointed to a spot well beyond where her tables were set up. "Everything from that decorative rock to the street edge is private property. I have the survey documents right here." A murmur went through the crowd. Rebecca's smile flickered but quickly recovered. "Well, we can easily move to the street. The point remains that excessive surveillance—" "Speaking of surveillance," I interrupted, "would you like me to play the security footage of your previous unauthorized uses of my property, including the time you lied to potential clients about this being your property to show? Or should we discuss the illegally distributed flyers?" Some of her audience started shifting uncomfortably. One woman in the back actually raised her hand. "What flyers?" "Oh, just some marketing materials," Rebecca said quickly. "Not relevant to today's discussion about community safety." "Actually, very relevant," I continued, pulling up the photos on my laptop. "These flyers, illegally placed in mailboxes, were part of a targeted harassment campaign after I stopped Ms. Sterling from using my property for her business activities without permission." The woman in the back frowned. "Illegally placed in mailboxes? Isn't that a federal offense?" "Yes," I nodded. "The HOA board is discussing that at tomorrow's meeting. Would you like to see the documentation? I keep very detailed records." More murmuring from the crowd. Rebecca's smile was now practically glued on, like a badly rendered graphic that hadn't quite loaded properly. "Perhaps we should take a brief break," she announced. "We can reconvene at the community center." "Great idea," I agreed. "The community center, where you should have held this event in the first place. I'm sure Barbara from the HOA board would be interested in hearing about this workshop. Should I call her?" The mention of Barbara's name was like running a system. Clean-up tool. People started gathering their things, making excuses about other appointments. Within minutes, Rebecca's carefully orchestrated workshop had dissolved into a handful of confused people helping her pack up her tables as she struggled. To fold the last table, I couldn't resist one final comment. "You know, in software development, we have this concept called failing gracefully. It means knowing when to admit something isn't working and exit cleanly, rather than causing more system damage." She slammed the table into her BMW's trunk. "This isn't over. Tomorrow's board meeting, you have no idea what's coming." "Actually, I do," I replied, holding up my phone. "Everything that just happened is logged, recorded, and ready to present to the board. Would you like a copy of the video for your records?" She didn't respond, just got into her car and peeled out of my driveway, leaving tire marks on the concrete. I made sure to document those too. Something told me tomorrow's board meeting was going to need all the evidence I could gather. Binary watched from her window as I added the morning's footage to my documentation folder. Her tail was fully puffed up, a clear sign that Rebecca's next system update was going to be more hostile than ever. The HOA board meeting was scheduled for 7 p.m. in the community center's main hall. I spent the afternoon preparing my documentation like I would for a major code review. Everything organized, time-stamped and backed up in triplicate. In tech, we have a saying, "Hope for the best, prepare for system failure." Given Rebecca's warning, I had a feeling this meeting would test every backup system I had. I arrived 20 minutes early, laptop and external drive ready. The community center was already buzzing with activity. Apparently, news of Rebecca's property values workshop had spread, and the usually sparse HOA meetings had drawn quite a crowd. Barbara, the HOA board president, spotted me as I walked in. She was a retired cybersecurity specialist, which explained why she'd been so supportive of my documentation efforts. "Alex! Perfect timing. We've had some interesting developments you should know about." Before she could elaborate, Rebecca Sterling made her entrance. She wasn't alone. Trailing behind her was a man in an expensive suit carrying a leather briefcase, definitely a lawyer, and 3 people I recognized from her earlier workshop. They were all carrying folders labeled Community Impact Analysis. "Looks like she's brought reinforcements," Barbara muttered. "This should be interesting." The meeting started promptly at 7. Barbara called for order and began with the usual HOA business, landscaping updates, pool maintenance schedules, the typical system maintenance tasks of community living. Finally, she reached the main event. "Now, we'll address the complaint regarding unauthorized use of private property and subsequent harassment issues. Alex Chen, would you like to present your documentation?" I connected my laptop to the projector and pulled up my evidence folder. Over the past 3 weeks, I've documented multiple instances of unauthorized use of my private property by Rebecca Sterling of Sterling Properties. This includes parking, violations, unauthorized business activities, and what appears to be a coordinated harassment campaign. I played the security footage chronologically, starting with the first parking incident and working through to that morning's workshop. The room was silent, except for occasional murmurs as I showed Rebecca's confrontations, the illegal flyers, and her admission of lying to clients about property ownership. "As you can see," I concluded, "this isn't about a simple parking dispute. This is about a real estate agent repeatedly violating property rights and then retaliating when asked to stop." Rebecca's lawyer stood up before I'd even finished. If I may, this presentation shows nothing more than a series of misunderstandings between neighbors. Miss Sterling, as a respected member of this community— "Objection!" called out a voice from the back. It was Mrs. Davidson, the elderly woman, from the driveway incident. That woman told my husband and me that she owned that property when she tried to sell us a house. The lawyer faltered. This clearly wasn't in his briefing documents. My client may have misspoken in the heat of the moment. She didn't misspeak, another voice chimed in. It was the young agent who'd been with Rebecca during one of the earlier confrontations. She regularly uses other people's driveways for showings. She told me it was standard practice. Rebecca's face had turned the same shade as her BMW. She grabbed her lawyer's arm, whispering furiously, but the damage was done. The crowd was buzzing with other stories now. Apparently, I wasn't the only victim of the Sterling properties. Parking scheme. If I may, Rebecca finally stood up, her voice sharp. This is clearly a coordinated attack on my professional reputation. I have here a report showing how Mr. Chen's excessive surveillance equipment has negatively impacted property values in the area. Actually, Barbara interrupted, the board has reviewed your report. We've also reviewed the property value assessments from 3 independent realtors. Surprisingly, properties near Mr. Chen's house have shown increased value due to the perceived security benefits. Funny how data works, isn't it? In programming terms, this was what we call a catastrophic failure, when every backup system you thought you had fails simultaneously. Rebecca's lawyer was frantically flipping through his papers. Her supporters were looking increasingly uncomfortable, and her carefully crafted narrative was crumbling in real time. Furthermore, Barbara continued, the board has received confirmation from the postal inspector that distributing unauthorized materials in mailboxes is indeed a federal offense. Miss Sterling, would you like to address the flyers? Rebecca grabbed her purse. This meeting is a sham. I have clients waiting. Stephen, handle this. She gestured to her lawyer and stormed toward the door. Ms. Sterling, Barbara called after her, leaving before the board's decision may impact your ability to appeal any sanctions. Rebecca paused at the door. For a moment I thought she might actually come back. Instead, she turned and fixed me with a look that would have crashed a lesser system. You've just made the biggest mistake of your life, she hissed, loud enough for everyone to hear. As she slammed the door behind her, Barbara simply smiled and made a note in her folder. Well, I think that outburst can be added to the documentation. Now, about those sanctions, Binary would have been proud of my restraint. In the face of a total system meltdown, sometimes the best response is to sit back and let the logs speak for themselves. The HOA board's sanctions against Rebecca Sterling were swift and comprehensive. She was banned from conducting any business. Activities in residential areas without proper permits faced a substantial fine for the mailbox violations and was required to issue a public apology for misrepresenting property ownership. It was like watching a system-wide security patch being implemented. The next week passed in blessed silence. No red BMW, no impromptu real estate workshops, not even a passive-aggressive flyer. My security cameras dutifully recorded nothing but the usual neighborhood activities, dog walkers, delivery drivers, and Binary's occasional standoffs with the local squirrels. Maybe she's finally given up, Tim suggested during one of our evening chats. Max was sprawled on my front lawn, having decided that my grass was particularly comfortable that day. I shook my head. In software development, when a problematic user goes quiet, it usually means they're planning something bigger. This feels like the calm before a major system crash. Tim raised an eyebrow. You really think she'd try something after the HOA meeting? That was pretty decisive. He had a point. The meeting had been a spectacular shutdown of Rebecca's operations. Her own lawyer had looked relieved to leave, and several of her former supporters had actually apologized to me afterward. Even Barbara had seemed satisfied with the outcome, but something kept nagging at me, like that feeling you get when your code compiles perfectly on the first try. It's either a miracle or you've missed something obvious. My instincts proved. Right 3 days later, I was working from home, deep in a debugging session, when my phone buzzed with an alert from an unexpected source. My friend Sarah, who worked at the county clerk's office, had sent me a text. "Hey, thought you should know Rebecca Sterling just filed for a property line dispute against your address. Claims your driveway encroaches on the public right-of-way. Might want to check your survey documents." I sat back in my chair, almost impressed by the audacity. This was a classic example of what we call escalation of privileges in tech. When a user, blocked from one type of access, tries to gain entry through a higher level of authority, I pulled up my property documents, all digitized and backed up, of course. The survey was crystal clear. My driveway was well within my property lines, with proper setbacks and all necessary permits. But fighting this through official channels would take time and potentially money. Just then, my security system pinged. Rebecca's BMW was driving past my house, slower than usual. She was on the phone, gesturing animatedly as she crept by at walking speed. Through my high-definition cameras, I could see her smile, that same unsettling smile from our last confrontation. Decided to do what any good developer would do when facing a potential security breach: consult the experts. I called Barbara. "Oh, I was just about to call you," she said when I explained the situation. "Did you know that Rebecca Sterling's real estate license is up for renewal next month? And that the licensing board takes complaints about professional conduct very seriously?" I hadn't known that, but I quickly opened a new documentation folder on my computer. "Tell me more." "Well," Barbara continued, sounding like she was enjoying this far too much, "as a former cybersecurity specialist, I understand the importance of thorough documentation. I may have sent your HOA meeting evidence to a friend on the licensing board, purely as a concerned citizen, you understand." I couldn't help but smile. Barbara was playing chess, while Rebecca was playing checkers. "What about the property line? Dispute? Already handled," Barbara assured me. "The county surveyor is an old colleague. He's expediting a review of your property lines. Should be done before her complaint even gets assigned to a reviewer." As I hung up, I felt both relieved and uneasy. Rebecca was escalating, but she was also getting sloppy, making rookie mistakes that would be easy to counter. In programming terms, she was pushing untested code to production, and it was bound to have bugs. Still, her slow drive-bys continued over the next few days. Sometimes twice a day, always on the phone, always with that unsettling smile. My security system dutifully logged each pass, adding to my growing documentation. Binary had taken to watching these drive-bys with particular intensity. Her tail, twitching in that way cats have when they're tracking something dangerous. I'd learned to trust her instincts. She had a better threat detection system than any code I could write. "Just keep watching," I told her one evening, as Rebecca's BMW made its second pass of the day. "Something tells me we're about to see what she's really planning." Binary's ears flattened, and she made that little chirping sound that meant trouble was coming. In the world of system security, that's what we call a critical alert. The question was, what kind of attack was Rebecca Sterling preparing to launch? The weekend arrived with an unexpected twist. I had a major software deployment scheduled for Saturday morning, the kind that requires full concentration and minimal interruptions. Everything was going smoothly until Binary started doing her alert dance by the window with unprecedented intensity. I checked my security feed and felt my stomach drop. Not only was Rebecca's red BMW back in my driveway, but she'd brought reinforcements. 3 other cars were parked behind her, effectively creating a blockade. But this wasn't another impromptu real estate meeting. This was something far more calculated. Rebecca was directing a team of people unloading what appeared to be photography equipment, professional cameras, lighting stands, and even a small drone. She'd transformed my driveway into an impromptu photo studio, complete with a backdrop set up against my garage door. "Perfect lighting here," I heard her say through my security system's audio. "We'll get the best angles for the encroachment documentation. Make sure you get clear shots of how the driveway affects street access." This was what we call in tech a zero-day exploit, an attack using a vulnerability that hasn't been patched yet. She was building evidence for her property line dispute, but doing it in a way that required her to trespass on my property to document the alleged trespassing. The irony would have been amusing if it wasn't so infuriating. I was about to head outside when my deployment server pinged with a critical error. The code was failing in production, and my team was blowing up my phone. I was caught in a classic developer's dilemma: deal with the immediate technical crisis or address the real-world invasion of my property. That's when I saw Rebecca pull out a measuring tape and start marking lines on my driveway with chalk. She was literally drawing new property lines on my concrete. System priorities had to be recalculated. I quickly messaged my team. "Critical situation at home. Taking emergency PTO. We'll make up deployment hours tomorrow." Then I grabbed my phone, tablet, and documentation folder. Time to handle this escalation. As I stepped outside, Rebecca looked up with that now familiar predatory smile. "Oh, Alex, how nice of you to join us. We're just doing some official documentation for the county survey board." Official? I kept my phone recording. Funny, because I just spoke with the county surveyor yesterday. They're not aware of any authorized documentation team. "This is independent verification," she said smoothly, while her photographer continued snapping pictures. "For my legal team's review." "Your legal team?" I pulled up my property documents on my tablet. "The same legal team that abandoned your case at the HOA meeting, or a new one that's actually willing to file fraudulent claims?" Her smile tightened. "There's nothing fraudulent about documenting a clear violation of public right-of-way regulations, except that you're trespassing to document a non-existent trespassing," I pointed out, "and defacing private property with these chalk lines. Would you like to see the actual survey? I have it right here." "We have our own surveys," she snapped, her professional facade cracking slightly. "Really?" I started taking pictures of her chalk lines. "Because, according to the county records, no new survey has been filed for this property in the last 5 years. Would you like to see the records? Or should we call the police and let them verify your official documentation team?" One of her photographers lowered his camera, looking uncertain. "Ms. Sterling, you said you had permits for this." "Of course, I have permits." She dug through her designer handbag, producing nothing. "While you're looking," I continued, "maybe you can find the drone flight authorization for residential areas. The FAA takes those violations pretty seriously." The drone operator immediately began packing up his equipment. "Sorry, Ms. Sterling, you didn't mention anything about permits. I can't risk my license." Rebecca's face had turned an interesting shade of red. "None of you are getting paid if you don't finish this documentation." "None of them are getting paid. Anyway," called a familiar voice. Barbara was walking up my driveway, phone in hand. "Because any evidence gathered through trespassing would be inadmissible, not to mention the liability issues for defacing private property." This was the moment. Rebecca's entire system crashed. She turned to her team, but they were already packing up, wanting no part of what was clearly becoming a legal disaster. The drone operator practically ran to his car. "You can't just—" Rebecca spluttered, watching her elaborate plan collapse. "Actually, we can," Barbara said cheerfully. "And since you're so interested in documentation, you should know that everything that's happened here has been recorded and will be added to the file for your license renewal review." As her team drove away, Rebecca stood in my driveway, surrounded by her chalk lines and abandoned equipment. She looked like a crashed program, frozen and unable to process her next move. "I suggest you clean up these chalk marks before you leave," I said, still recording. "The HOA has strict rules about defacing property." "Right, Barbara?" Barbara nodded solemnly. "Very strict. The fines can be quite substantial." Rebecca grabbed her measuring tape and started gathering her things, muttering under her breath. But as she got into her BMW, she turned to me with a look of pure venom. "You think you're so clever with your cameras and your documentation," she hissed. "But accidents happen, technical failures, data gets lost, systems crash." As she peeled out of my driveway, Barbara and I exchanged looks. That hadn't been just anger in Rebecca's voice, it had been a threat. And in my experience, when someone threatens your system, it's time to implement maximum security protocols. After Rebecca's thinly veiled threat, I spent Sunday implementing what we in tech call a hardening protocol, maximizing security measures across all possible attack vectors. I upgraded my home security system with backup power supplies, added redundant cloud storage for all footage, and even installed a small weather station to ensure my cameras could adapt to any lighting conditions. Tim thought I was being paranoid when he saw me testing the new equipment. "Don't you think this is a bit much?" he asked, as Max investigated the new motion sensors with his usual enthusiasm. "In system security," I explained, adjusting a camera angle, "there's no such thing as too much redundancy when you're facing an active threat." I didn't have to wait long to find out if my upgrades were necessary. Monday morning, my phone buzzed with multiple alerts at once. Binary was already at her window post, tail puffed to maximum size, her equivalent of a critical system warning. The red BMW was back. But this time Rebecca wasn't alone. She had brought what looked like a small construction crew. Before I could even get outside, they had set up traffic cones around my driveway and were unloading equipment from a truck. I grabbed my phone and tablet, already pulling up my property documents and local ordinances. As I opened my front door, I heard Rebecca's voice, loud and theatrical. "Yes, as you can see, this driveway clearly violates setback requirements. We'll need to mark it for removal and—" She spotted me. "Oh, Alex, we're just conducting a preliminary assessment for the county." The construction crew looked more like day laborers hired from the home improvement store parking lot. They were shifting uncomfortably, clearly sensing they'd been dragged into something questionable. "Interesting," I said, starting my recording. "Because I just checked with the county permitting office online, and there's no record of any assessment scheduled for this address." "This is a private assessment," Rebecca declared, waving a document that looked suspiciously like it had been printed from a home computer, "for the pending property line dispute." The dispute that was already dismissed by the county surveyor. I pulled up the official dismissal notice on my tablet. "Would you like to see the documentation?" One of the workers stepped forward, looking at the papers in Rebecca's hand. "Ma'am, you told us this was an official county job. We need proper permits for any road work or driveway modification." "Oh, the permits are coming," Rebecca said quickly. "This is just preliminary." "Actually," I interrupted, "any preliminary assessment would still require property owner notification and consent. Since I own this property and haven't given consent, this would constitute criminal trespassing and attempted vandalism." The workers started packing up their equipment immediately. Rebecca tried to stop them, her voice rising to a pitch that made Binary's ears flatten against her head. "You can't leave. I'm paying you to do a job." "Not worth losing our licenses," one worker muttered as they quickly loaded their truck. Rebecca watched her latest scheme crumble, her face contorting with rage. That's when she made her fatal error, the kind of critical mistake that brings down entire systems. She grabbed a sledgehammer from the back of the departing truck. "Fine, I'll do it myself. Let's see how you like having your precious driveway declared a safety hazard." She raised the sledgehammer, But before she could swing it, multiple things happened at once. My security system's new high-resolution cameras captured everything in perfect detail. Barbara, who had apparently been watching from her morning walk route, started recording on her phone 3. Tim, out with Max for their morning routine, called out, "Smile for the cameras, Rebecca." 4. And most importantly, a police cruiser turned onto our street, the same one that regularly patrolled our neighborhood every morning at 8:45 a.m. Rebecca froze, sledgehammer still raised, as the police car's lights flipped on. The officer stepped out, taking in the scene with practiced calm. "Ma'am, please put down the sledgehammer." Rebecca's face went through a fascinating array of emotions: rage, realization, panic, and finally, a desperate attempt at her real estate agent smile. "Officer, this is just a property dispute, a simple misunderstanding. A misunderstanding involving a weapon and threats of property damage." The officer raised an eyebrow. "Please put down the sledgehammer and step away from the property." As Rebecca slowly lowered the sledgehammer, I could almost hear the sound of her plans crashing like a cascading system failure. The officer took statements from everyone present, paying particular attention to my security footage and Barbara's video. "Would you like to press charges?" the officer asked me. I looked at Rebecca, who was sitting in the back of the police car, her perfectly styled hair now decidedly less perfect. In programming, sometimes the best way to stop a malicious user is to revoke their access entirely. "Yes," I said, "and I have extensive documentation of the events leading up to this incident." As the police car drove away with Rebecca in the back, Barbara walked over, still holding her phone. "Well," she said with satisfaction, "I think the real estate licensing board will find this footage particularly interesting." I nodded, already creating a new folder on my cloud drive labeled Criminal Charges Documentation. Sometimes the best security update is the one that removes the threat entirely. The aftermath of Rebecca's sledgehammer incident spread through Riverside Heights faster than a viral tweet. By lunchtime, my inbox was flooded with messages from neighbors I'd never even met, all sharing their own Rebecca Sterling horror stories. It was like finding out a system bug you'd been fighting was actually affecting the entire network. I spent most of the morning on the phone, first with the police filing a formal report, then with my homeowner's insurance, just in case, and finally with Barbara, who was positively giddy about the whole situation. "The real estate board called an emergency meeting," she informed me gleefully. "Apparently, threatening property damage with a deadly weapon isn't considered professional conduct." Who knew? I was in the middle of backing up all my security and footage to multiple secure clouds when my doorbell rang. It was Rebecca's former protégé, the young agent who'd been present during some of the earlier confrontations. She looked nervous, clutching a folder to her chest. "Hi, Alex," she said, maintaining a safe distance from my security cameras. "I'm Jenny. I think there are some things you should know about Rebecca." I invited her in, making sure all my indoor cameras were recording. Binary watched from her perch as Jenny spread out documents on my coffee table. After the HOA meeting, I started documenting everything, Jenny explained. "Rebecca's been doing this for years, using people's driveways, lying about property ownership, even fabricating market analyses to pressure people into selling. I was afraid to say anything because she controls so many listings in the area, but after today," she pushed the folder toward me. It was filled with dates, locations, and detailed accounts of Rebecca's business practices. In tech terms, this was like finding an entire log of unauthorized system access attempts. "She's been targeting other neighborhoods too," Jenny continued. "There's a pattern. She finds houses with good curb appeal, uses their driveways for showings of nearby properties, then starts spreading rumors about property values dropping. Sometimes she even stages incidents to make the area seem less desirable." I was scrolling through the documents when my phone buzzed. It was a text from Sarah at the county clerk's office. "Rebecca just got released on bail. Thought you should know." Almost simultaneously, my security system pinged. The red BMW was back on Oak Valley Drive, moving slowly past my house. Through my cameras, I could see Rebecca in the passenger seat. Apparently, she'd called a friend to drive her back to her car, which was still parked near my house. She looked different. Her perfect hair was disheveled, her designer outfit wrinkled from her brief stay in holding, but it was her expression that caught my attention. The fake smile was gone, replaced by something harder, more determined. She was staring directly at my security cameras as they passed. "Oh no," Jenny whispered, watching the feed. "I know that look. She's not done." "What do you mean?" "When Rebecca gets that look. Last time, a client who refused to list with her had their sprinkler system malfunction overnight in winter. The resulting ice rink took out their retaining wall. Another time, a competing agent's listing photos were accidentally replaced with pictures of garbage dumps on the MLS. Nothing could ever be proven, but I nodded, understanding completely. In cybersecurity, we call this plausible deniability, attacks designed to look like accidents or coincidences. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Barbara. "Emergency HOA board meeting tomorrow morning. Bring all your documentation. The real estate board representatives will be there." As I was reading Barbara's text, Binary suddenly went into full alert mode, arch-backed, fur standing on end, eyes fixed on something outside. I checked my cameras just in time to see Rebecca's friend's car passing by again, slower this time. Rebecca had her phone out, apparently taking pictures of my house. "Classic reconnaissance," I muttered, already typing notes into my security log. "Gathering data for the next attack vector." Jenny stood up, gathering her documents. "I should go, but be careful, okay? Rebecca doesn't handle public humiliation well. After that sledgehammer thing..." She paused at the door. "Maybe I should share these documents with the real estate board and the police." I walked her to her car, noting that Binary maintained her alert stance the entire time. Once Jenny left, I did what any good system administrator would do when facing a persistent threat. I started implementing additional security protocols. First, I set up motion-activated sprinklers, officially for lawn maintenance, but strategically placed to discourage nighttime visitors. Then I added infrared capabilities to my cameras and installed backup power supplies for all critical systems. Finally, I started a new documentation folder labeled Post-Arrest Incidents, because something told me that Rebecca Sterling's dramatic arrest wasn't the end of this story. It was just the beginning of a new and more dangerous phase of her attack plan. The emergency HOA board meeting was scheduled for 8 a.m. in the community center's main hall. I arrived early, armed with my laptop, 3 backup drives, and enough documentation to crash a small server. The real estate board representatives were already there, 2 serious-looking individuals in business suits who reminded me of our company's compliance auditors. Barbara was setting up the projector when Rebecca arrived. She'd managed to restore her usual polished appearance, but there was something different about her, a barely contained fury that seemed to radiate from behind her attempted professional smile. Her lawyer was notably absent. "Before we begin," Rebecca announced to the room, "I want to state for the record that yesterday's incident was a complete misunderstanding. I was merely conducting a property inspection when..." "A property inspection with a sledgehammer," Barbara interrupted, pulling up the first image on the screen. A crystal-clear shot from my security camera of Rebecca wielding said sledgehammer like a cartoon villain. The real estate board representatives exchanged glances. One of them, who introduced herself as Ms. Rodriguez, spoke up. "Miss Sterling, perhaps you'd like to explain why you were conducting an unauthorized property inspection while out on bail for trespassing charges." Rebecca's smile flickered. "I had every right to be there. The property line dispute has been dismissed by the county surveyor, Barbara finished, clicking to the next slide showing the official dismissal notice. But let's talk about pattern of behavior, shall we? What followed was what we in tech would call a comprehensive system audit. Barbara had compiled not just my documentation, but evidence from multiple sources throughout the neighborhood. Security footage, timestamps, witness statements. It was like watching a masterclass in data correlation. Then Jenny stepped forward. I hadn't even seen her come in, but there she was, clutching her folder of documents. I have additional information, she said, her voice shaking slightly but growing stronger as she continued. Records of similar incidents across multiple neighborhoods, unauthorized property access, misrepresentation of ownership, manipulation of market analyses. Rebecca's face went through several interesting color changes as Jenny laid out document after document. You're making this up, she snarled. You're just a junior agent who kept very detailed records, Jenny finished, sliding a USB drive toward the real estate board representatives, including emails, text messages, and recorded conversations. In programming, we have this concept called catastrophic cascade failure, when one system breakdown triggers a chain reaction of other failures. What happened next was the real estate equivalent. Ms. Rodriguez cleared her throat. Ms. Sterling, in light of this evidence and yesterday's incident, the board is immediately suspending your real estate license pending a full investigation. You can't do that. Rebecca's professional facade cracked completely. Do you know who I am? I've sold more properties in this area than anyone else. Yes, the other representative, Mr. Chen, no relation, interrupted. Which makes these violations even more serious. We're also notifying the state licensing board and recommending a review of all your recent transactions. Rebecca turned to me, her eyes blazing. This is your fault. You and your stupid cameras and your obsessive documentation. You think you're so clever with your technology, but you have no idea what's coming. Are you threatening Mr. Chen again, Miss Sterling? Barbara asked sweetly, pointing to the active security cameras in the community center. Please do be specific. The police detective handling your case asked us to record this meeting. That's when Officer Martinez, who had been quietly sitting in the back of the room, stood up. I hadn't even noticed him there. Good security personnel know how to blend into the background until needed. Ms. Sterling, he said, given your previous threats and today's behavior, we're adding intimidation charges to the existing complaints. I'd advise you to leave now and contact your attorney. Rebecca looked around the room, probably realizing, for the first time, that her usual tactics weren't going to work. Her carefully constructed system of influence and intimidation was crashing down around her. This isn't over, she announced to the room at large. None of you understand how things really work in this business. You think a few cameras and some paperwork can stop me. Please. As she stormed out, her heels clicking aggressively on the floor, Barbara turned to me. You might want to upgrade your security again. That sounded an awful lot like another threat. I was already typing notes into my laptop. Way ahead of you, I've got a new security protocol ready to deploy. Plus, I gestured to Officer Martinez, I think we've got some extra eyes on the situation now. The officer nodded. We'll be increasing patrols in your area, and Ms. Sterling's bail conditions now include a restraining order. She's not allowed within 500 feet of your property. But as I packed up my documentation and headed home, I couldn't shake the feeling that Rebecca Sterling wasn't going to let legal restrictions stop her. After all, in both tech and real estate, the most dangerous attacks often come through proxy servers, or in this case, proxy people. The next few days brought an eerie quiet to Riverside Heights. The red BMW was notably absent, but something felt off, like when your system is running too smoothly and you're just waiting for the hidden malware to reveal itself. I was working from home, debugging a particularly nasty piece of code, when Tim knocked on my door. His usually cheerful expression was replaced with concern, and Max's tail wasn't wagging, never a good sign. "You need to see this," he said, holding up his phone. "It's all over the neighborhood Facebook group." I looked at the screen and felt my stomach drop. Someone had posted a lengthy community alert about my house. The post was from a newly created account named Concerned Neighbor, but the writing style was unmistakably Rebecca's. Warning: suspicious surveillance activity at 2187 Maple Ridge Lane. Multiple cameras recording children walking to school. Homeowner has extensive computer background. Possible security risk. Property values already dropping due to privacy concerns. Contact HOA if worried about neighborhood safety. The post had dozens of comments, but before I could read them, my phone started buzzing with notifications. Similar warnings were appearing on Nextdoor, local Facebook groups, and even a newly created website, riversideheightssafety.com. "This is what we call a distributed denial of service attack," I explained to Tim. "Instead of attacking directly, she's trying to overwhelm me with social pressure from multiple sources." Just then, Binary started her alert dance by the window. Outside, a small group of people I'd never seen before were walking slowly past my house, pointing and taking pictures. They were wearing matching t-shirts that read, "Protect Our Privacy," with a website URL below. Rebecca's new domain. "She's escalating to social engineering," I muttered, already documenting everything, "trying to turn the neighborhood into her own botnet." Tim watched as I started taking screenshots and recording timestamps. "Want me to get Barbara involved?" "Already." "Texting her," I replied, my fingers flying over my phone's keyboard. But first, I opened my laptop and started doing what any good developer would do when facing a coordinated attack, following the digital trail. The website had been registered through a privacy service, but there were traces of Rebecca's digital fingerprints everywhere. Similar writing patterns, shared IP addresses, even the same custom font she used on her real estate marketing materials. Barbara arrived within minutes, already on her phone with the HOA's lawyer. "This is textbook harassment," she declared, scrolling through the posts, "and a clear violation of her restraining order, even if she's using proxy accounts." "I've got better than that," I said, turning my laptop to show them. "Look at the website's registration time, 9:47 p.m. last night. According to the police report, Rebecca was at the station updating her bail conditions until 10:30 p.m. But there's an email confirmation for the website design sent to her personal account at 9:50 p.m. She was orchestrating this while pretending to cooperate with the police," Barbara said, her eyebrows raising. "That's going to look great in court." As we documented everything, more neighbors started showing up, not to protest, but to support. Jenny arrived with screenshots of similar smear campaigns Rebecca had run against other agents. The Davidsons, the elderly couple from the earlier confrontation, brought records of how Rebecca had tried similar tactics in their old neighborhood. "She did this in Oakwood Gardens too," Mrs. Davidson explained. "Tried to drive down property values by spreading rumors about surveillance. But it backfired. People actually started wanting houses near the safe, monitored areas." That gave me an idea. I pulled up my home security dashboard and started crafting a response. Within an hour, I had created a detailed presentation showing how my security system had helped catch 3 package thieves, identified a hit-and-run driver, and even reunited a lost dog with its owner. Barbara immediately posted it to the neighborhood groups. "Security success stories, how modern technology makes Riverside Heights safer." The comments started shifting, from concern to appreciation, from fear to interest. Then Jenny dropped another bombshell. "Remember those property value decreases Rebecca was warning about? Look at this." She pulled up recent sales data. Houses Near properties with visible security systems are selling for 10% more than similar homes without them. Rebecca knew this. She used it as a selling point for her own listings. The protesters, outside, started dwindling as the real story spread through the neighborhood channels. By evening, RiversideHeightsSafety.com had been transformed into a community security awareness resource, its domain redirected through some clever legal maneuvering by Barbara's lawyer. "You know she'll try something else," Tim said as we watched. The last of the crowd disperse. I nodded, already updating my security logs. Of course, but that's the thing about documentation. It's like having a really good antivirus. The more attacks you record, the better you get at preventing new ones. Binary watched from her window perch as I added the day's events to my evidence folder. Her tail was still twitching, a sign that she, like any good system monitor, sensed. There were still threats to detect. Rebecca Sterling had tried to turn the neighborhood into her personal attack network, but she'd forgotten the first rule of security. The truth leaves logs that can't be erased. Just when I thought Rebecca's social media campaign had been thoroughly debugged, she deployed a new attack vector. This time, it came in the form of an official-looking document being circulated through the neighborhood. Petition for the regulation of private surveillance systems in residential areas. I first learned about it when my doorbell camera caught someone dropping off a stack of papers at every house on my street. The deliverer wasn't Rebecca. She was still bound by the restraining order, but I recognized the person as one of her former real estate team members. Pulling up the footage on my security feed, I zoomed in on the document being delivered. The petition was cleverly worded, never mentioning me or my address directly, but painting a vivid picture of invasive monitoring and privacy concerns. It called for strict limitations on private security systems, including a requirement for community approval of any cameras visible from public areas. "She's trying to use the HOA bylaws as a backdoor exploit," I explained to Tim when he brought me his copy. "If she can't attack directly, she'll try to change the system permissions." Binary watched from her perch as I scanned the petition into my documentation system. The language was pure Rebecca, the same dramatic flair she used in her real estate. Listings, just repurposed for fear-mongering. "Check this out," Tim said, pointing to a clause in the fine print. "Any existing systems would need to be modified or removed within 30 days of the regulation passing." She's not just trying to prevent future installations, she's trying to force you to take down your cameras. I was about to respond when my phone buzzed with an alert from my perimeter sensors. A group of people was gathering at the end of my driveway, all holding copies of the petition. Through my cameras, I could see they were setting up a card table with a "Protect Our Privacy" banner, the same slogan from Rebecca's failed website. "Time to deploy the countermeasures," I said, pulling up my laptop. I'd been preparing for something like this since the social media incident. First, I activated Protocol Alpha, my new outdoor display screen, tastefully mounted by my front door. It began cycling through a slideshow of all the positive security incidents my system had recorded, the recovered stolen packages, the prevented car break-ins, even the heartwarming clip of me helping Mrs. Davidson when she'd fallen in her driveway. My cameras had caught her distress signal before anyone else noticed. Then I triggered Protocol Beta, a series of posts scheduled to go live in all the neighborhood social media groups, each highlighting a specific way the security system had benefited the community. Jenny had helped me prepare these, adding statistics about increased property values and decreased crime rates in areas with active security monitoring. But the real knockout was Protocol Gamma, something Barbara had helped me set up for just such an occasion. As the petition group grew larger, a police car quietly turned onto our street. Officer Martinez stepped out, walked over to the group, and began asking for permits for their gathering. "You need a special event permit for any organized activity on public streets," he explained, gesturing to their table. Also, I notice you're collecting signatures with promises of gift cards that could constitute paid solicitation, which requires a different permit. The group's leader, flustered, tried to show some paperwork, presumably something Rebecca had prepared. Officer Martinez studied it, then made a call. Minutes later, a code enforcement officer arrived. "These permits appear to be forged," he announced after a brief inspection. "The authorization codes don't match our database." I watched through my cameras as the group quickly packed up their table and dispersed. Binary's tail finally relaxed. She'd been in full alert mode since they arrived. Later that evening, Barbara called an emergency HOA meeting to address the petition situation. The community center was packed. Apparently, Rebecca's latest move had attracted more attention than she'd intended. "Let's talk about facts," Barbara began, pulling up my security statistics on the projector. "In the 6 months since Alex installed his security system, reported crime in our neighborhood has dropped by 40%. Package theft is down 75%, and response times for emergencies have improved thanks to the recorded evidence provided to first responders." Jenny stepped up next, armed with more data. "And here's something interesting. I pulled the property records. Rebecca Sterling's own house has 6 security cameras. She featured them prominently in her listing photos when she bought the place. Last year, calling them a premium security amenity. The room erupted in murmurs. Barbara let them die down before delivering the coup de grace. Also, the HOA's lawyer has confirmed that the petition itself violates several state laws regarding false representation and fraudulent documentation. The signatures are being collected under false pretenses, using forged permits and unauthorized promises of compensation." I added the meeting's footage to my ever-growing documentation folder. In system security terms, Rebecca had just tried to implement a policy change without proper authentication, and the firewall had held strong. But as I reviewed the day's security logs that night, I noticed something concerning: a pattern of cars driving by my house, each pausing briefly before moving on. None of them was the red BMW, but they all followed the same route, like they were mapping out the territory. In tech, we call this reconnaissance scanning, probing for weaknesses before a major attack. Something told me Rebecca Sterling's petition failure was just going to push her toward even more desperate measures. The reconnaissance pattern I'd noticed turned out to be the precursor to Rebecca's most audacious attack yet. It started at 3 a.m., that crucial time when most security systems are running on automated monitoring. My phone buzzed with multiple alerts, yanking me from a deep coding dream. Binary was already at full alert, her fur standing on end as she stared out the window. I pulled up my security feeds to find something that made me question if I was still dreaming. A tow truck was backing into my driveway, lights off, moving with suspicious precision. But here's where it got interesting. This wasn't just any tow truck. Through my enhanced night vision cameras, I could clearly see Sterling Property Services written on the side. Rebecca had apparently created a fake property management company, complete with vehicular assets. I quickly activated my emergency protocols while dialing the police. The floodlights around my house burst on, illuminating the scene like a stadium. The tow truck operator froze, caught in the sudden brightness like a bug in debugging mode. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," I called through my outdoor speaker system, another recent upgrade. "This entire attempt is being recorded in 4K resolution." The driver jumped, clearly not expecting a disembodied voice to call him out. Through my cameras, I could see another vehicle parked down the street, a familiar red BMW, its driver shrinking down in the seat. "The police are already on their way," I continued through the speakers. "And I've got a clear shot of both vehicle, license plates, plus facial recognition running on all participants." That last part was a bluff. I hadn't actually implemented facial recognition. The privacy implications were a bit too complex for my taste. But sometimes in security, the threat of monitoring is as effective as the monitoring itself. The tow truck driver apparently decided this job wasn't worth the risk. He started to pull away, but my cameras caught him making a call first. Even with my high-end microphones, I couldn't catch the conversation, but the gestures suggested it was a heated one. Officers Martinez and Rodriguez arrived just as the tow truck was leaving, but the red BMW was still parked down the street. They approached it carefully, flashlights illuminating a very frustrated-looking Rebecca Sterling in the driver's seat. "Miss Sterling," Officer Martinez said, "this is a clear violation of your restraining order. Would you like to explain why you're within 500 feet of Mr. Chen's property at 3 a.m.? "I'm parked on a public street," Rebecca snapped, but her usual confidence was cracking. "I'm allowed to park here." "Actually," Officer Rodriguez interjected, checking something on her tablet, "according to the GPS coordinates, you're approximately 475 feet from Mr. Chen's property line, and given the tow truck we just saw leaving." I watched through my cameras as Rebecca's facade finally crumbled. "He's ruining everything. His cameras, his documentation. Do you know what this has done to my business, my reputation? I just wanted him to know what it feels like to have something taken away." The officers exchanged glances. "Ma'am, please step out of the vehicle." As they led Rebecca to the patrol car, Barbara appeared on the scene. Apparently, my security alerts were set to notify her too. She was still in her bathrobe, but carried herself with her usual authority. "I've got the tow company's information," she announced, holding up her phone. "Registered just 3 days ago. The paperwork was rushed through with some interesting documentation." I was already pulling up the company records on my laptop. "Look at this. The business address is a vacant lot. Classic shell company setup, like a spoofed email domain. And here's the best part," Barbara continued, scrolling through her phone. "The tow truck? Rented using a corporate card from Sterling Properties, her real estate company. Not very good at covering her digital tracks, is she?" Officer Martinez was documenting everything, but he looked concerned. "This is going beyond simple harassment now. We're looking at attempted theft, fraud, violation of restraining order. Don't forget the false business documentation," Barbara added helpfully. "I'm sure the State Business Licensing Board will be very interested in that." Through my cameras, I could see Rebecca in the back of the patrol car, her face a mixture of rage and desperation. She was mouthing something, probably more threats, but my microphones weren't picking it up. "You'll want to upgrade your security again," Officer Rodriguez suggested as they prepared to leave. "This level of escalation usually indicates—" "More attempts coming," I finished. "In tech, we call this a desperation attack, when a user tries increasingly risky methods after being blocked from their usual access." I spent the rest of the night implementing new security measures and backing up all my footage of the incident. Binary remained on high alert, her eyes fixed on the spot where the tow truck had been. She knew as well as I did that this wasn't over. Rebecca Sterling had just elevated our little property dispute into full-scale criminal territory, and people who cross that line rarely back down easily. After the midnight tow truck fiasco, I decided it was time to implement what we in our tech call a zero-trust security model. Assume every approach is hostile until proven otherwise. I took a day off work and dedicated it to fortifying my defenses. First came the physical upgrades. I installed bollards, those sturdy metal posts you see outside government buildings, at strategic points around my driveway. They could be remotely lowered for authorized access, but would stop any unauthorized vehicles dead in their tracks. It wasn't cheap, but as we say in cybersecurity, sometimes the most expensive breach is the one you fail to prevent. "Isn't this a bit excessive?" Tim asked, watching me calibrate the bollard sensors while Max investigated the new installations with his usual curiosity. "In system security," I explained, adjusting the sensitivity settings, "there's no such thing as excessive when you're dealing with a proven threat. Besides," After last night, I was interrupted by a notification from my perimeter sensors. A car was slowly driving past, not the red BMW. Rebecca was still in custody, but a black SUV with tinted windows. Through my cameras, I could see someone filming my house with a professional-grade camera. Another one of her proxies, I muttered, already logging the license plate. She's probably trying to document my security upgrades to claim harassment again. But I was ready for this. My new system automatically tagged and tracked suspicious vehicles, creating detailed logs of their patterns. The black SUV had already passed by 3 times that morning, each time with a different person filming. Classic distributed surveillance. Attempt. Barbara stopped by around noon, bringing lunch and news from her police contacts. Rebecca's being held without bail this time, she reported, while Binary investigated her sandwich with interest. The judge wasn't amused by the restraining order violation, but her real estate assets are frozen, and she's getting creative with her resources. How creative? I asked, pulling up my security feeds. She's been making calls from detention. Lots of them. Jenny's been monitoring the real estate circles, and apparently Rebecca's calling in every favor she's ever earned. People are being pressured to choose sides. I nodded, watching another unfamiliar car cruise past my house. I've noticed. My system's logged 15 different vehicles conducting surveillance today, all connected to local real estate agencies or property management companies. Barbara raised an eyebrow. You can track that? Pattern recognition algorithm, I explained, pulling up the data. Cross-references vehicle registrations with business licenses. One of my colleagues in data analytics helped me set it up. Look at this cluster analysis. I showed her how the surveillance patterns had evolved. First single cars, then pairs, now coordinated groups. They were mapping my routines, testing response times, probing for weaknesses. It was exactly how a sophisticated cyber attack would progress. She's building a network, Barbara mused, studying the patterns. Even from detention, she's trying to maintain control of the narrative. Classic Rebecca. Just then, my phone buzzed with an alert from Jenny. Emergency! Check your property listings now! I pulled up local real estate sites and felt my stomach drop. My house was listed for sale, not just on one site, but on multiple platforms. The listing agent, Sterling Property Management LLC, apparently, Rebecca had set up more than one shell company. That's bold, Barbara said, already on the phone with her lawyer, using a fraudulent company to list a house she doesn't own. Wait! I interrupted, zooming in on the listing photos. These pictures were taken today. Look at the timestamps. The photos showed my house from various angles, including clear shots of my new security upgrades, but they were carefully edited to make the security measures look ominous. Harsh shadows, dramatic angles, even some creative Photoshop work to make my cameras look more intrusive than they were. She's using my security system against me again, I realized. These listings are designed to attract negative attention. Look at the description. Perfect for security enthusiasts. Current owner has spared no expense in monitoring capabilities. Property comes with extensive surveillance infrastructure. Barbara was already crafting a cease and desist letter, but I had a better idea. I pulled up my development environment and started coding. Within an hour, I had created a web crawler that would automatically detect and report fraudulent listings of my property. Then I went a step further, implementing what we call a honeypot in cybersecurity, a trap for malicious actors. I created a fake security vulnerability in my system, something that looked like an easy target, but would actually track anyone who tried to exploit it. "You're enjoying this, aren't you?" Barbara observed as I tested my new digital countermeasures. Couldn't help grinning. Let's just say it's not often I get to use my cybersecurity skills for home defense. Besides, I gestured to Binary, who was intently watching another suspicious car pass by. Someone needs to show Rebecca that not all systems can be manipulated. As if on cue, my phone buzzed with an alert. The first fraudulent listing had been automatically reported and removed. The honeypot had already logged 3 attempts to access my vulnerable security feeds. The game was evolving. Rebecca might be in custody, but her network was active and testing boundaries. Time to show them what a really secure system looks like. Rebecca's network of real estate agents continued their surveillance campaign for the next few days, but my honeypot strategy was working perfectly. Every attempted intrusion, every suspicious drive-by, every fraudulent listing, all of it was being logged, tracked, and reported. It was like watching a virus repeatedly try to penetrate a well-maintained firewall. Then came what we in tech call the zero-day exploit, an attack through a vulnerability you never saw coming. It started with a knock on my door at 7 a.m. Through my cameras, I could see a group of official-looking individuals in hard hats and safety vests. "City Utilities," the leader announced when I answered through my smart doorbell. "We've got reports of a gas leak in the area. Need to check your property immediately." Something felt off. In my security feeds, I could see their truck had no official city markings, and their credentials looked generic. I quickly ran their vehicle plate through my database while keeping them talking through the intercom. "Strange," I said, watching. "The database search. I just got my utility inspection last week. Let me verify your work order number." The group exchanged glances. My database pinged. The truck was registered to another shell company, this one created just yesterday. Classic social engineering attempt, using fake authority to gain access. "Actually," I continued through the intercom, "I'm calling City Utilities to confirm your orders. Would you mind waiting?" They didn't wait. Instead, they quickly retreated to their truck and sped off, but not before my cameras captured clear images of their faces and vehicle details. I was uploading the footage to my evidence folder when Jenny called. "Alex, you need to see this. Rebecca's team is spreading rumors about a major utility issue in your area. They're telling potential buyers that the whole street is unstable due to underground problems." "Let me guess," I said, already pulling up local real estate listings. "And coincidentally, there are several distress sale properties listed nearby." "Exactly. All listed through different shell companies. But I traced the paperwork. They're all connected to Rebecca's network." I was about to respond when Binary went into full alert mode. Fur puffed, tail straight, eyes fixed on something outside. My security system started sending multiple alerts simultaneously. Through my cameras, I watched as a small fleet of vehicles descended on my street. The fake utility truck was back, along with several others. They were setting up barriers at both ends of the street, creating what looked like an official work zone. "They're trying to isolate the target," I muttered, recognizing the tactic from cybersecurity training. "Control access to shut down defense systems." I quickly activated my highest security protocol, what we call lockdown mode in tech. All entrances secured, cameras at maximum sensitivity, and automatic alerts sent to both law enforcement and the real city utilities department. Barbara arrived just as the fake work crew was starting to approach houses with evacuation notices. She pulled up in her car, lights flashing. Apparently, being a former cybersecurity specialist wasn't her only surprise credential. "Federal Marshal," she announced, holding up a badge that made the crew freeze in their tracks. "Anyone want to explain why you're impersonating city officials?" The next few minutes were chaos. Real police cars arrived, followed by actual utility workers. The fake crew tried to flee, but found their truck blocked by my retractable bollards, which I may have activated at a strategically perfect moment. As the police were sorting through the mess, Officer Martinez approached me with a familiar face. The leader of the fake utility crew was talking. "Rebecca orchestrated everything from detention," he explained. "She's been promising commissions, kickbacks, future listings, anything to get people to help her campaign against you. The plan was to create a fake utility crisis, force an evacuation, and then have her property management team secure the house for safety reasons. Classic privilege escalation attempt, I noted, already adding his statement to my documentation. Using fake authority to gain system access. The real utility workers confirmed there were no issues in the area, and the police collected evidence of the fraudulent evacuation notices. Within hours, Rebecca was facing additional charges of conspiracy and attempted fraud. But the real victory came later that day when Jenny called with news from the real estate board. They're not just suspending her license now, they're revoking it permanently. And the state board is auditing every transaction she's ever handled. I watched through my cameras as police led away the last of Rebecca's fake utility crew. Binary had finally relaxed her alert stance, sprawling in her window perch with an air of satisfaction. "You know," Barbara said, reviewing the security footage, "with me, in all my years in cybersecurity and law enforcement, I've never seen someone try to social engineer their way into property theft quite like this." I nodded, backing up the day's footage to my secure cloud storage. The best security. Systems don't just stop attacks. They catch people who think they're too clever to get caught. As I added the final files to my evidence folder, I couldn't help but appreciate the irony. Rebecca's obsession with my driveway had led her to create such an elaborate attack network that she'd essentially documented her own downfall. Sometimes, the best defense really is just letting your opponents crash their own system. The aftermath of Rebecca's failed utility crew scheme spread through Riverside Heights like a viral update. My security footage of the incident had been submitted as evidence, but somehow, I suspect Barbara had something to do with it. Clips of the confrontation made their way onto the neighborhood's social media channels. The community's reaction was fascinating to watch, like observing user behavior after a major system patch. People who had been hesitant about my security measures were now stopping by to ask for advice on camera installations. The HOA board was flooded with requests for security system approvals. "You've started a trend," Tim remarked one evening, as we watched yet another security company van pull up to a house down the street. Max was sprawled on my lawn as usual, occasionally lifting his head to watch the installation process. "More like exposed a vulnerability that needed patching," I replied, monitoring my feeds. Rebecca's schemes showed everyone how important proper security really is. Jenny stopped by later that day with updates from the real estate world. The fallout from Rebecca's actions was still spreading through the industry like a cascading system failure. "The state board's audit is revealing everything," she explained, while Binary watched her from her usual perch. Fake property listings, manipulated market analyses, unauthorized access to multiple properties. She's been doing this for years, just never got caught because nobody documented things as thoroughly as you did. My phone buzzed with a notification. Another neighbor, requesting advice on security camera placement. I'd created a simple guide document, complete with optimal angles and coverage recommendations, which was now being shared throughout the community like a security best practices manual. Barbara called just as I was finishing up a consultation with the Davidsons about their new system. "You'll never guess what happened at today's emergency real estate board meeting," she said, barely containing her glee. "They found more shell companies," I guessed, pulling up my documentation files. "Better, they're implementing new security protocols for all local real estate activities, mandatory documentation of property access, verified identification for all agents, and guess what they're calling it?" "What? The Chen Protocol?" Barbara chuckled. "Your documentation methods are becoming the industry standard. They're even requiring security cameras at all open houses now." I had to appreciate the irony. Rebecca's attempts to shut down my security system had ended up making it the template for the entire local real estate industry. In tech terms, she'd tried to crash the program, but ended up inspiring a better operating system. The neighborhood was changing too. Those suspicious drive-bys had been replaced by friendly waves from neighbors installing their own security cameras. The community Facebook group, once a battleground for Rebecca's propaganda, was now filled with posts sharing security tips and success stories. "Remember when she tried to claim your cameras were decreasing property values?" Tim asked, scrolling through recent sales data on his phone. "Houses with security systems are now selling at a 15% premium in our area." Even the local police had noticed the change. Officer Martinez stopped by to tell me that reported crime in Riverside Heights had dropped significantly since the security camera network expanded. "Your documentation of Rebecca's schemes created a blueprint for community security," he said. "Other neighborhoods are starting to implement similar programs." The most surprising development came from Jenny, who had taken over many of Rebecca's former listings. "You know what's funny?" she said during one of her updates. "Some of her old clients are actually grateful this all happened. Turns out, having proof that your real estate agent can't secretly access your property is a selling point." I was adding these updates to my documentation when my security system pinged another unfamiliar car approaching. But this time, it wasn't conducting surveillance. It was a young couple, clearly house hunting, taking pictures of my security, set up with open admiration. "Excuse me?" the woman called out when she saw me on my porch. "We're looking to buy in this neighborhood specifically because of the security standards we've heard about. Would you mind telling us about your system?" As I gave them a brief overview of my setup, keeping the most critical details private, of course. Security through obscurity is never a good strategy. I couldn't help but think about how Rebecca's campaign had backfired. She tried to paint my house as an over-monitored fortress, but instead had proven exactly why such security was necessary. Binary watched from her window as more neighbors stopped to join the impromptu security consultation. Her tale was relaxed now. No more threats to detect, no more hostile actors to monitor. The system was secure, the community was stronger, and the real estate queen had essentially engineered her own downfall. In programming, we call this elegant failure, when a system crashes in such a way that it improves the overall architecture. Rebecca had tried to exploit what she saw as a vulnerability, only to help create a more robust security framework for the entire community. Life in Riverside Heights settled into a new normal, like a system that's finally been properly debugged and optimized. My driveway, once the epicenter of real estate warfare, was now just a driveway again, albeit one protected by state-of-the-art security measures that had become the neighborhood standard. The red BMW was notably absent from our streets, having been impounded as evidence in Rebecca's growing list of criminal cases. Jenny kept me updated on the legal proceedings, which were unfolding like a particularly thorough system audit. "The prosecutors are amazed by your documentation," she told me one afternoon, while Binary lounged in a sunbeam streaming through my newly installed security windows. "They're saying it's the most comprehensive evidence they've ever seen in a real estate fraud case." The changes in our community were subtle but significant, like background processes running smoothly after a major update. The HOA had implemented what they called the Neighborhood Watch 2.0 program, integrating various security systems into a cooperative network. I'd helped design the protocols, ensuring privacy while maximizing effectiveness. "It's like you've turned the whole neighborhood into a secure subnet," Tim observed, watching as another family had cameras installed across the street. Max had appointed himself unofficial security consultant, insisting on inspecting each new installation in his territory. My own security system had evolved too. I'd refined it based on lessons learned from the Rebecca incident, implementing what we in tech call adaptive security architecture. a system that learns and improves from each attempted breach. Barbara stopped by regularly to check on the neighborhood's security evolution. "You know what's ironic?" she said during one visit. "Rebecca's whole campaign against your cameras ended up creating the safest neighborhood in the district. The police just released their quarterly crime statistics. We're down 70% from last year." The real estate market in Riverside Heights had transformed as well. Jenny, now running her own agency with a strong focus on security and transparency, reported that properties in our area were commanding premium prices specifically because of the security infrastructure. "Buyers are actually requesting houses near your security network," she explained. "They're calling it the safe zone. Your driveway drama has literally changed how people view home security in real estate. Even my work-from-home routine had improved. No more interruptions from unauthorized parking or impromptu real estate showings. My coding sessions were peaceful, interrupted only by Binary's occasional window patrol alerts, which these days were mostly about squirrels daring to enter her surveillance zone." The community center had set up a monthly security workshop, where I helped neighbors optimize their systems. It reminded me of debugging sessions at work, except instead of fixing code, we were fine-tuning camera angles and sensor positions. "Remember when Rebecca tried to claim the cameras were invasive?" Mrs. Davidson chuckled during one workshop. "Now everyone wants to know how to set up their own system." The workshops became social events, with neighbors sharing security footage of heartwarming moments. Lost pets being reunited with owners, kids' forgotten bikes being protected from theft, elderly residents being assisted after minor falls. What Rebecca had tried to paint as surveillance had become community care. My driveway itself had become something of a local landmark. New residents often used it as a reference point. "You know, the house with the super secure driveway, the one that took down the real estate queen?" The story had spread beyond our neighborhood, too. Local news had picked up the tale, focusing on the community's innovative approach to security rather than the drama. I'd even been asked to speak at a real estate security conference, though I declined, preferring to maintain my system's privacy through relative obscurity. One quiet evening, as I sat on my porch reviewing security logs, now mostly routine, events and friendly notifications, Tim and Max stopped by on their evening walk. "Hard to believe it all started with a parking dispute," Tim said, settling into the porch chair while Max assumed his usual lawn patrol position. I nodded, watching. Binary monitor the street from her window perch. In tech, we say that the biggest systems often start from the smallest bug reports. Sometimes it takes one persistent error to expose a larger system flaw. Barbara joined us, having spotted our impromptu gathering during her evening security. "Our check." "Well, your bug report led to a complete system overhaul. Rebecca's preliminary hearing is next week, by the way. The prosecutor says with your documentation it's basically an open and shut case." Looking out over the peaceful street, with its network of subtly integrated security measures protecting happy families, I couldn't help but appreciate the irony. Rebecca's attempt to claim my driveway had ended up securing not just my property, but an entire community. Binary chirped softly from her window, her way of indicating all systems were normal. The neighborhood security network hummed quietly in the background, a testament to how the right response to a threat can strengthen an entire system. Rebecca's preliminary hearing turned into one of the most talked-about events in Riverside Heights history. Like a well-documented system breach, every detail of her schemes was laid bare in the courthouse. My security logs played a central role, with the prosecutor using them to create a timeline that would make any project manager proud. The charges were extensive: criminal trespassing, attempted property theft, fraud, forgery, harassment, and multiple counts of conspiracy. Each charge was backed by crystal-clear video evidence and meticulous documentation. It was like watching a system audit report come to life in legal terms. Jenny attended the hearing and kept me updated via text. They just showed the sledgehammer footage. Judge's eyebrows nearly hit the ceiling. Rebecca's appearance had changed dramatically. Gone was the polished real estate queen persona, replaced by someone who looked like a system running on minimal resources. Her designer outfits had been replaced by business casual from department stores, and her signature perfect hair seemed to have lost its administrative privileges. But the most significant change was in her network. One by one, her former allies turned state's evidence, providing testimonies that read like error logs in a massive system crash. The fake utility crew leader, the tow truck driver, even some of her former real estate colleagues all documented her elaborate schemes in detail. "It's like watching a botnet being dismantled," Barbara commented as we reviewed the hearing. Transcripts. She testified about the HOA incidents, bringing her federal marshal expertise to bear. Every node is exposing more connections. The impact on the real estate industry was seismic. The state board had implemented what they called the Sterling Protocols, though not in her honor. These were strict new guidelines for real estate agents, requiring comprehensive documentation of all property access and client interactions. Essentially, they'd taken my security practices and turned them into industry standards. Back in Riverside Heights, the changes were even more pronounced. The neighborhood had evolved into what tech folks would call a secure enclave, a community where security and transparency were built into the infrastructure. Our monthly security workshops had expanded to include representatives from other neighborhoods looking to implement similar systems. "You've created a replicable security model," Tim observed during one of these sessions. Max had appointed himself official workshop greeter, ensuring every participant received a proper tail wagging. "Welcome. Other communities are literally copying your setup." The local police department had taken notice too. Officer Martinez gave a presentation at our latest workshop, highlighting how our security network had affected crime rates. "It's not just about catching bad actors," he explained. "It's about preventing incidents before they happen. Your cameras have become a deterrent." Binary seemed to appreciate the calmer atmosphere, though she maintained her vigilant window monitoring. Her alert signals these days were more about neighborhood kids retrieving stray balls or delivery drivers needing driveway access guidance than potential security threats. Even my work-from-home routine had improved. My team had become fascinated by my security system architecture, and we'd started incorporating some of its principles into our software security protocols. "If it can stop a determined real estate agent," my project manager joked, "it can probably stop most cyber threats." The most interesting development came from the real estate market itself. Jenny's new agency, built on principles of transparency and security, was thriving. She'd hired several of Rebecca's former agents who'd turned state's evidence, retraining them in ethical practices. "We're calling it security-first real estate," she explained during a visit. "Every property we list comes with a complete access log and security assessment. Buyers love it. They know exactly who's been in the house and when." Barbara had integrated these practices into the HOA guidelines. "It's like we've created a new standard for residential property management," she said. "Every access logged, every interaction documented. Rebecca would hate it." Speaking of Rebecca, her influence in the neighborhood had been completely decompiled, to use a programming term. Her former listings were being handled by other agents. Her shell companies had been dissolved, and her elaborate network of real estate connections had been thoroughly debugged. The red BMW, once a symbol of real estate aggression, had been sold. At a police auction, ironically, it was purchased by a security company that specialized in protecting high-end properties. They turned it into a mobile security patrol vehicle, complete with camera systems modeled after my setup. Talk about a system upgrade. Tim laughed when we saw it patrolling nearby neighborhoods, now painted blue and white with community security emblazoned on the side, as I added the preliminary hearing documentation to my ever-growing evidence folder. I reflected on how a simple driveway dispute had cascaded into a complete transformation of our community's security culture. In programming terms, Rebecca's attempts to breach my defenses had led to a comprehensive system-wide enhancement that benefited everyone. Binary watched from her window as another security company van pulled up to install cameras at a new neighbor's house. Her tail had that satisfied twitch that seemed to say, "System secure, all processes running normally." The final chapter of the Rebecca Sterling saga concluded in a way that even the best system architects couldn't have designed better. Her sentencing hearing came exactly 6 months after the fake utility crew incident, and the judge's decision read like a perfectly executed program termination. 3 years in state prison, plus 5 years of probation during which she was banned from any real estate-related activities. The judge was particularly impressed by my documentation system, citing it as a model of citizen protection in the digital age. In tech terms, it was like getting a 5-star review on your code from the senior developer. I watched the sentencing through the courthouse's video feed, Binary attentive by my side. Rebecca's final statement was surprisingly subdued. Gone was the entitled real estate queen who thought she could override property rights with a designer smile. Instead, she reminded me of a crashed program finally recognizing its fatal errors. "I never thought a simple driveway could lead to all this," she said, looking more defeated than defiant. "I just couldn't stand someone saying no to me." The aftermath brought changes none of us had expected. The Chen Protocol for real estate security had been adopted by 3 neighboring counties, with more following suit. My security system design had become a template for residential protection, though I kept some of my more advanced features proprietary. Good developers never reveal all their code. Barbara had been promoted within the Federal Marshal Service, now heading a task force on real estate fraud. "Your case exposed a whole network of similar schemes," she told me during her last visit, before transferring to the regional office. "We're finding Rebecca's methods weren't unique, just more aggressive than most." Jenny's security-focused real estate agency had expanded to 3 offices, with a waiting list of clients specifically requesting properties in what they called Chen-secured neighborhoods. She'd even hired a tech team to develop a property access tracking app based on my documentation system. "From driveway dispute to industry disruption," she mused during a coffee catch-up. "You basically forced the whole real estate industry to Ctrl Alt Delete and restart with better security protocols." Tim and Max still did their evening security patrols, though now they were joined by other neighbors and their pets. A distributed monitoring network that combined technology with good old-fashioned community watchfulness. "It's like having a neighborhood-wide antivirus system," Tim joked, "but with more tail-wagging. The HOA had transformed too. Our monthly security workshops had evolved into community tech forums where residents shared tips on everything from camera placement to smart home integration. Even Mrs. Davidson, who once thought Ring doorbells were too complicated, was now helping others optimize their security feeds. My own system continued to evolve. Each attempted breach during the Rebecca saga had taught me something new about security, like a machine learning algorithm getting better with each training cycle. I'd added features I never thought I'd need, from thermal imaging to pattern recognition, always staying one step ahead of potential threats. Binary had maintained her position as chief security supervisor, though her window perch had been upgraded with a custom-built observation platform. Her alertness had become legendary in the neighborhood. Kids would wave to her as they passed, knowing she was part of the security network that kept everyone safe. 1 year after Rebecca's sentencing, I received an unexpected email from her former protégé, who'd been with her during the early confrontations. She was starting a consulting firm specializing in ethical real estate practices and security compliance. "Your driveway dispute didn't just change one neighborhood," she wrote. "It created a new standard for property rights and security. We're using your case as a teaching tool for what not to do and how to do things right." Looking back, it's almost amusing how a simple act of parking in the wrong driveway escalated into a complete overhaul of residential security practices. In programming terms, Rebecca's attempts to exploit what she saw as a vulnerability had, instead, triggered a comprehensive system upgrade that benefited the entire network. My driveway, the catalyst for all this change, now looks pretty much like any other in Riverside Heights, except for the state-of-the-art security features that have become standard in our community. The retractable bollards, the smart cameras, the access logging system, they're all just part of daily life now, like running background processes that keep everything secure. Sometimes, on quiet evenings when I'm working late on code, I'll check my security feeds and smile at how peaceful everything looks. Binary will be at her post, monitoring her domain, while the neighborhood security network hums quietly in the background. The system is stable, all processes running smoothly, and, if you're wondering, yes, I still document everything. Because the best security isn't just about preventing breaches, it's about being ready when someone thinks they've found a way to break your code. Just ask the former real estate queen of Riverside Heights. She learned the hard way that some driveways come with better firewalls than others. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.